Tapestry weaves together the threads of our struggles and doubts, curiosities, our faith, our joys and hopes to create meaningful conversations that matter. You know those late night conversations that go unexpectedly deep? That's what we want to capture with the Tapestry podcast. And we want everyone to jump in the conversation. Because when we are heard and valued, we can begin to believe we are loved. Welcome to the Tapestry podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Tapestry podcast. Things are a little bit different today. We are here with people that you know and one person who you've only heard about before in almost every episode, actually. When Haley or one of us has said, "Hi, Heidi," this is the person we're referring to.
Hi, Haley.
So, she's also the funniest person I know. This is my wife, Heidi, and so she gets to join us for this episode. Our dear friend Haley is going to be on a short hiatus, and we wish her all the best. She's got a lot on her plate right now. And we're also here with our friend Mwangi.
What's up?
And today we are talking about the question, why do we hide? And this has a lot of levels to it. Another title for this episode was Exhibit the Mess. Like what if we just showed the mess, the stuff in our life, in our lives that we'd really rather hide? What if we just did that? And so we get to explore the question today, why is it that we hide those kinds of things? And I'm excited to have the conversation with you three. We bring different personalities to the mix, different life experiences. Heidi and I were talking about this conversation a little bit last night. And the fact that we are two very different people in some pretty specific ways plays into this question really beautifully. So
definitely,
we'll have a chance to talk about that. So I guess just kind of initial thoughts as we get started on especially this idea of the things that we hide and maybe even the way we hide them. I think social media has made this especially maybe important or easy. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, 15 years ago, I think I preached a sermon on this where I talked about our digital masks, these things that we use to hide or at least show only certain parts of us. So I'd love to hear each of your thoughts on why we hide, specifically maybe what kind of masks we tend to use individually, ourselves, and then also the ones we see kind of out there.
Mm-hmm.
You go first, Heidi.
Sure thing. So definitely the social media masks. Everyone puts up the pictures that they want to portray or want people to think their life looks like or is. So even if someone's in a terrible relationship, they put, "So happy with my best friend," or "Look at us on vacation," when really they're fighting the whole time or something. So all those pictures, all the way that people see profiles, it's all just one big display of masks, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in personal life, right? Same thing in professional life. It made me think about not just in the current social media, but so in the scientific literature, right? You don't get to publish unless you proved something. But the story is always in the journey it took to prove that thing, or if you failed. So one thing I've been thinking about is at a conference last week is the masks. I would say even in the scientific community where you think things are objective, but they only celebrate discoveries. They don't celebrate the exploration necessarily. You know, it's all about unless you did something that had significance, no journal is going to allow you to publish. When in reality, there's so many people trying so many things, and we can learn through other people's mistakes, not to repeat the same thing. Because again, if Heidi's working on an experiment and it's not working out for her, because she's not able to publish, I might be doing the exact same thing, wasting money and resources doing the same
Right.
thing. So to me, even in that, I would say in that world, there's this sort of not hiding behind something, but maybe not showing the full story of how things come about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that angle. That's really good. Yeah, what are the? I think we're going to talk a little bit later more about some of the consequences of hiding, but that's a really great one. I mean, for human discovery, there are consequences to hiding too much or only showing the parts that feel successful by some probably exterior definition.
Right.
And
Because everything else feels like a failure.
Because
yeah,
that exactly,
not-
if you read that, you're like, okay, I guess I
it's
didn't
not the
do
end
it.
result.
Yeah, yeah.
which is interesting because in science's kind of purest form, there's no failure, right? You are only ever discovering. Like, not proving your hypothesis is, in fact, still a success because you have found at least one way to not prove that hypothesis.
Right.
And, but that's not how you get the research dollars.
That's not how you see, but so you end up hiding in a sense, or putting on a mask that's around like, oh, well, look at me, I've done this other thing, but your passion may lie somewhere else, right?
Right.
But you may chase after this other thing because that's what's going to give you the grant dollars. But that's yeah.
Or even in everyday life, if you only share the accomplishments and not the struggles or the trials and errors, other people might be going through the same thing. Like Mangi was saying about, like, what if I'm doing something that he's going through, but I'm not sharing it when we could be helping each other
Yeah.
instead of just that end goal that everyone wants to post immediately.
Yeah.
And I think we like the mask. So think about when you're in an interview, right? When you're in an interview, you want to show your best. You really don't want to talk about how you failed. I mean, we do, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's all around this, like,
But it's like a good
idea
fail,
to be
right?
successful. But to be honest, your interviewer also doesn't want you to say you failed too much, right? They want to hear, like, it's you're both putting on masks, right? I'm going to tell you how wonderful this job is. Everybody here loves each other. It's so perfect, right? I'm not going to tell you about, like, we're interviewing you because the last 3 people left the job, right? We're not going to be as honest with you as possible, right? And I also will say,
Because there's something going on in our corporate
we're
culture
not,
that we
we're
haven't
not
quite
going to
figured
say
out.
that.
And
Yeah. So I'll put on my
burden for people in
mask.
your position.
Exactly. I'll put my mask saying, wow, we're a family here. And then I'll put on a mask. I would love to work for you because you guys are wonderful, right?
Yeah.
And then we're not seeing each other. And then we finally meet. And then you're like, oh, let me tell you how it really is around here.
Yeah.
You see behind the curtain.
Oh, that's a great great phrase. See behind the curtain, and the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear that is like the Wizard of Oz, and I know that I'm sure that see behind the curtain comes from other places as well, but that idea of if people only knew the real me, then I would lose some sort of power or influence, or they wouldn't believe or trust me anymore. Kind of like, like the wizard in Wizard of Oz. And one of the things I mentioned a minute ago is that I want to talk about kind of our own specific masks that we put on. Mm-hmm. So listener, buckle up. I'll start, guys. I'll start. I am, for those of you who are familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a 3, and one of the challenges of being a 3 is that I tend to really want people to like me. I really want to at least appear successful, and different 3s have different definitions of what that looks like. But like, I always want to look prepared, at least appear to be prepared, even if I'm not really prepared. I will put on a front, even if I'm really not prepared or feeling out of my depth or overwhelmed. So, yeah, part of my personality, part of the way that I move through the world is that I will typically always try to put my best foot forward. And it's hard for me to understand people who don't feel that way. And in fact, until like pretty recently, like in the last few, maybe it's been 10 years now, but for most of my life, when somebody said, "Oh, I don't really care what other people think," I was like, "Liar, that's not true. That's impossible. No one feels that way." Or people who don't feel like they have to, put on a pretense, or people who, really like don't feel like they have to like achieve or maybe like impress other people, or like that they're not actually looking for admiration. I was like, no, impossible. Everyone actually is doing that, but they're saying they're not. But it turns out there really are people who like care very little about what other people think, or only care about what certain people think, or whatever. And so I've had to learn that is not me. And there are parts of me that hate that about me, but I've learned to accept that part of me in ways too. And even sharing that is kind of hard for me. So
Yeah.
somebody else.
I'll go next because I'm right next to you. So I am on the Enneagram scale. I'm a 1, which means I don't care what people think. I care more about accomplishing a task. And for me, also being an introvert, but people who see me don't believe I'm an introvert because I'm a performing introvert. So if I'm on stage,
As she is with some frequency.
I have a lot of performance in my pocket. So singing, dancing, acting to a crowd is not a problem. Put me in a room with people who want to make small talk and I want to crawl in a hole. So if you can't see me, I have bright green hair, so I don't mind drawing attention. I like wearing the costumes. I like I said, performing. But when it comes to personal small talk, peel back the layers, peel back the performance, I'm like, no, thank you. I'll be in my dressing room.
Yeah. So I guess to put a finer point on it, how would you define that mask then? Like, what would you call that mask that you tend to wear?
Performance mask, I guess, that if I'd rather be performing or presenting than being vulnerable in a personal way.
Yeah. How about you, Mwangi?
Yeah, I mean, I put a mask at work, right? I think for me, work is not necessarily, maybe I can be authentic, but I don't feel like it's the place. Sometimes work settings don't allow that. Not that they prevent it, but I'm just saying sometimes you have a relationship with folks where you're there to do work. You can still hang out and have beers after work, but I'm talking about the establishment itself. You know, there's parameters. And so to be honest, in some ways, they don't want your true self, right? Maybe they don't want you to profess certain things. So I put on masks at work all the time, or depending on where I'm at, who I'm talking to, how long I have to talk to you, how long I have to hang out with you, what's your relationship with me, that kind of thing. So it's almost, it can be exhausting because it's always you're always assessing the situation. So you're like, okay, who's this person? How do I feel this morning? Am I in their territory? Are they in mine? Usually I'm in other people's territory, you know, like their offices, their location. So I have to conform to them, which then makes, especially I travel a lot for work. So it makes the travel day exhausting sometimes when you're kind of like, so when I leave, go to the hotel, I'm like, oh my God, I feel so tired. Right?
Yeah.
Because you've been like, it's a mask, it's not fake, but it's also not necessarily all of you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the part. What you were just saying, Mwangi, reminded me of a term that I've more recently become familiar with, code switching. And I'm sure that is something that you deal with more often than I do. Do you find, and we can cut this part out if you want, do you find yourself kind of code switching, especially if you're around more like white people versus more black people?
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem talking about code switching. I've talked about it in other recorded formats. So it happens, right? And it can be exhausting. It was about a month ago. I was at CU Anschutz, and there's a organizational psychology student who's actually studying this. Essentially, like,
Yeah.
how does code switching basically like, how does it cause stress, right? How is that a stressor, and what does that mean over time? So for folks who are not familiar with what code switching is, it's where, let's say me as a black person may talk white, quote unquote, in my workplace, right?
Right.
Versus when I'm hanging out with my black friends, I may talk in a slang manner or things like that, or I maybe use different words. And the idea is you code switch so that you can conform. And it's a protective shell so that if I talk a certain way, then people don't look at my skin and just feel more comfortable. It's really about making the other folks more comfortable. So that's happened to me, I mean, many, many, many times. I used to work in upstream oil and gas, which is like called the oil patch, or if you've ever seen that show called Landman, exactly that, right? Hung out with people in pickup trucks and good people, but some people who had never seen a black person before,
Right.
things like that. So it's not, so it's like, how do you approach that? Yes, it can be exhausting depending on, like I said, on the situation, but that is very similar. I like the tie here, Mike, about hiding yourself. In relation to code switching too, right? I just use work an example, how women dress at work, right? So, or can I wear would somebody see me different if I'm wearing dreadlocks or not, right? So maybe I don't, right?
Yeah.
That's a type of hiding. I may not want to express myself. I don't want to, Heidi looks good in that green hair, but I don't know, like me, can I do that, right? Even though I want to, right? I'm going to hide myself,
Absolutely.
right? I'm going to try to quote unquote conform. But that becomes very, very exhausting, right? And the point this student was making is obviously, and we were in a conference about workplace hazards, right? This idea, we're talking about safety at work. And her point is, and in there we're talking about, okay, if people come to work in many places and these are stressors, this is no different than if I was working with Mike and he's a welder and there's welding fume and I'm breathing. It's same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's or being exposed to radiation. It's affecting my health. So are these things,
Yeah, and viewer, listener, in case you haven't heard before, that's the field that Mwangi works in, is safety, keeping people safe at work. And yeah, I've worked around welders before. My first W-2 job was at a gravel plant, and the welders, I think it might have been the fumes, man. Like they were different. Like they were some crazy guys, and like delightfully crazy. But sometimes it's like, I don't know if you should be doing that. Okay, I'm gonna go over here now with my shovel. So, yeah, I think we all tend, I mean, people like me, who, kind of like a cisgender white guy, straight, who, like has the look of somebody who kind of fits in as well. Maybe I don't have to code switch as much as other people I know, but where I see it and where I don't know if it's hiding as much as just kind of blending or fitting. My main job is at a church in Broomfield, Colorado, and I do this thing here online, and I also work with teenagers, and so I'm different with teenagers than I am with adults that I work with, or older folks at the church, and we have plenty of those, and I love them all. They're awesome, but there's a big difference between somebody who's in their 80s or 90s and somebody who's 11 or 12. And then, of course, this medium of being online where I'm talking to a camera right now and my stunningly beautiful wife. I've talked about her before on the podcast and mentioned this, but now those
She's
of you
real.
watching
She's
the video
not.
version.
Yeah, she's not a figment of Mike's imagination.
I will
am not
collect
making it
the
up.
paycheck later. I am an actress, everyone.
Stop ruining it.
Royalties,
But
Heidi, royalties.
Yes.
I
Be here all
also,
week.
I also work. I told you she's the funniest. She's so witty and she's so quick. It's so annoying. I mean, can you guys see the look she's giving me? I'm sorry. By annoying, I mean I wish I were that quick and that witty. She always has the response. Where I was going is I would also work at a bicycle shop once a week during the busy season when it's bright and sunny out and everybody wants to ride bikes. I go and help out there. I work in the service department, so I'm either turning wrenches or working at the service counter. So you would bring your bicycle to me. I would say, oh, here are the things that we see wrong with it. Here's how much it's going to cost you to fix them all. And here's how long it's going to take us to do it. And there's like different code there, like different expectations of me. And so I think there's at least some degree to which I'm different in each of those. I don't know if that's the same. That's not the same to me as hiding or holding back some of me. And I've been there at the shop long enough that like kind of everybody knows me and feels comfortable around me and talking about, if they want to talk about spiritual things, we can talk about spiritual things. If they want to make crude jokes, then they don't hold back around me either, which I appreciate actually. Actually, just yesterday, somebody said like, "Oh, Mike's here." I'm like, and I said something back that was in line with the jokes that were going on, and everybody thought that was great. So don't judge me, friends. I don't know where I was going with that, but
Yeah, it's not necessarily hiding. I don't think both of you have mentioned being in the workplace and switching to make people feel comfortable in that environment. So you're going to talk different to a 14-year-old in youth group than you are to the 80-year-old in 8 a.m. service. I've had jobs where I wouldn't have been allowed to have green hair in the workplace, but now I own a business where I work with dogs and they don't care what color my hair is because they think it's gray. So, but absolutely, we change our personalities how many times during a day, depending on who's next to us and who we're dealing with to have successful relationships. But yeah, what is that true self at the end of the day when Mike and I are together on the couch, that true person who I am versus the face I put on for a client or in a church service or setting where people don't really know the true me.
Man, that was a perfect segue to kind of some of the spiritual side of this. And that is, I know I find myself, or have in the past found myself, putting on kind of a spiritual mask. And part of that is like the going back and forth between different worlds. But I think anybody who's part of any kind of faith community, whether you're Jewish or Buddhist or Muslim or Christian or fill in the blank, like there's probably some like performative aspect to it where you are like one person on the day when everybody gets together and maybe a slightly different person when it's not that day or you're not together with everybody. I mean, the classic is like, on Sundays he's at church, but on Wednesdays he's
Saturday night.
Doing whatever it is. I definitely came across that when I moved from New Jersey, where Mongi and I both kind of grew up there, and moved to Arkansas, which is a very different culture. And New Jersey at that time in the 1990s was already very, very much moving post-Christian, and it was not expected that people would go to church. Was that your experience, Mongi?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was moving in that way, and also, I think because of maybe a lot of diversity, there wasn't necessarily like, let's say in some areas Catholicism is predominant. You know what I'm saying? That wasn't necessarily the case, I feel like. Anyway, go ahead.
So when I moved to Arkansas, and it was like very, very much expected that you would go to church on a Sunday, and when I got there, people would ask, "What religion are you?" And what they meant was, what denomination of Christianity do you belong to? I was like, oh, like I'm not Buddhist. Well, I'm not sure what you're asking me. And then I figured it out. I remember going to church either at my church or at friends' churches, and being like, oh, this kid goes to church. Like, I know what he's like at school, or what I know at least her reputation for partying or whatever. So, and that's not to like speak ill of Arkansas or the South or church-going culture, but to bring up the fact that many of us have a lot of experience with wearing spiritual masks. That is, we know how to either talk the talk or walk the walk without it really changing the inside of us or being part of, I love that word you used, true self.
Right.
So I wonder if we could talk for a moment in our last few minutes of this episode about maybe some of the spiritual masks that we tend to wear.
Well, to piggyback off of that, I moved from Chicago to Nashville. So that was a huge culture shock for me. And trying to fit into the Bible Belt culture. And my least favorite thing is Christianese. So when people throw out, if you haven't heard that term, it's well, praise the Lord, hallelujah, the cliche responses, I should say. And to me, that immediately puts up that wall of, oh, you're looking down on me, or you're on a pedestal, or there's like, there goes our real relationship, because this just became very cliche in our responses to each other. We were required to greet each other at church with, how are you? I'm blessed and highly favored of the Lord. And if we didn't respond with that, then we were corrected. And so it just felt like no one really cared how I was, as long as I was responding in the right Christianese at the time.
Whoa, that is like such a great Christianese. Yeah, so listener, Christianese, I think you described it very well. And that is such a good example.
Drives me
Blessed
nuts.
and highly favored of the Lord is not something that you would hear in corporate America. Not something you would hear in a public school, not something you might hear in like on a ski lift or in just casual conversation. But it's like the kind of thing that certain areas of Christianity, certain, I guess, traditions within Christianity really lean heavily on, like having those words or phrases to use. I try to steer clear of them. I probably don't, because it's impossible to not use at least some of that if it's kind of what you grew up in. But that one was perfect. That's a great example. I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted.
Sorry. Go for it, Wonky.
I was thinking the same lines, actually, Heidi, sort of this toxic positivity, right? Yes. Like you have to be on 100 when you come in there. You can't be sad, because then if you are, or I'm just saying, like, you have to show up in a certain way, and if you don't, then like, why are you here? Which is kind of like, doesn't make sense. So I think that's the mask. Like, yeah, but everybody's awesome. It's awesome. Everything's going so well. You do like, so it's almost like there's no chance for you to say anything else besides that, right? And so to me, in essence, sometimes it can backfire, right? It's a mask where, yep, we're all here. We're all good. Everything's so good. Like, yeah, that's, not appealing to me.
And that positivity is a mask in itself. Where do you look positive enough to, like you said, to be here? Otherwise, why are you a church when it should be the opposite? That's where you should be able to drop all your masks and be vulnerable and honest. But that is not my experience. Always.
Yeah.
There are exceptions.
Yeah, there are exceptions. And I think we try not to just like tout Broomfield UMC, the church that we're connected to, all the time, but
that is the exception.
I think one of the things, that I've really appreciated about that community is when I ask somebody, even on a Sunday morning, how they're doing, a lot of times I get like I'm all right. Like, things could be better. Even from, like, not just from folks that that I know very well, sometimes people I don't know very well, and even from the very top of our senior leadership. Like, if they're not doing great, they're like, I'm all right. I'm glad I'm here, though. Like, and that, I think, is a beautiful thing, and maybe even a beautiful way to end this episode. That is that maybe we don't have to wear the masks, even in those settings where it feels obligatory. And I think that's called vulnerability. And so in our next episode, we're going to be talking about how do we get vulnerable, and maybe even how that can free us, and maybe even some of the limits of that, or the spaces where that can go wrong. So join us next time. If you want to get deeper let's keep this in, even though it's a fumble. If you want to connect more deeply with Tapestry stuff, you can go to tapestrytalk.org. You can get connected on our Discord channel there. You can find other podcast episodes. You can find previous seasons material and just kind of see everything that's going on. So check us out there, anywhere podcasts are, and also on YouTube. And you can find links for those things in podcast description and YouTube description. And thanks for joining us for this episode. And thank you, Heidi, for joining us for these.
Wonderful.
We're going to have Heidi on 3 episodes, which is going to be awesome.
Very happy to be here.
The Tapestry podcast is produced by Stephen Bailey. Original music was scored by Taylor Martin. Our hosts are Haley Bird, Wangi Ndonga, and me, Mike Orr. Special thanks to Lauren Richmond Jr. and Resonate Media. You can learn more about Tapestry and join the conversation on our Discord channel at tapestrytalk.org. Thanks for joining us.